Welcome to Gina Lento's Session 5 video presentation on corporate greed. Let's first have a look at what was different about corporate greed in the 21st century. Then we'll see what current financial practices are sailing a bit close to the wind. It's interesting to analyze the national debt in this context and ask if the national debt is really any different to the smoke and mirrors game, say, of Enron. Finally, we would not be good candidate leaders without attempting some forethought about what could be the next global financial crisis and how to take stock of what we might do to prevent complete disaster. Here are some of the household names of the biggest corporate scandals of the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Now, looking at two of these cases, Lawrence attributed the massive scale of these financial failures to the lack of or the reduction of proper control of either civic processes or ignoring cultural norms. But I think this thought can be generalized to other cases as well. If we look at two of them, Enron and the subprime scandal, we see that they share elements in common, and in fact, lack of sufficient regulatory controls, relaxation of industry norms, and departures from cultural standards of truth in reporting and others, were at the core of their corporate deceit. And they were both aided by complicit banks in their speculative practices who didn't question incomprehensible financial reporting, or in fact created adaptive banking practices to accommodate these risky practices. Comparing the leaders of those multiple fantastic failures, it's easy to see how their behavior roundly contradicts the approach to authentic leadership described by Northouse. Following George's model, Northouse listed 5 basic characteristics of authentic leadership. Authentic leaders have a strong sense of purpose and convey that well. They have strong values about the right thing to do. They build and maintain trusting relationships with others. They act with self-discipline in alignment with those values, and they have an intact moral compass that allows them to always be mindful of the situations and needs of others. Obfuscating accounting practices and increasingly complex exotic financial products does not indicate a clear sense of purpose, other than greed, which is not a strong value about the right thing to do, nor did they build trusting relationships with others. Continually overflating the company value does not show self-discipline, and predatory lending can hardly be described as empathetic to borrowers. In light of these egregious and widespread failures and the damages caused by them, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002, which called for stricter oversight of corporate accounting and made for heavier penalties for infractions, and the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010, which, among other things, established the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now, 15 years on, the consensus is that Sarbanes-Oxley has largely achieved its goals. But 10 years into Dodd-Frank, what was seen as success is now threatened by moves to relax the regulatory requirements for some banks. But scandals of different types continue to emerge, reflecting on the lethal safety failures and environmental pollution cover-ups of these airline and automotive companies. One economic scholar questions whether justice can ever keep up with corporate sin. Looking at some modern dodgy practices of a strictly financial nature, we consider spoofing and cryptocurrency. Spoofing is the practice of traders placing orders for securities or commodities with no intent to execute those orders. The effect is it deceives other traders as to the true demand and supply, which in turn affects pricing moves, and then the spoofers leverage those moves for further financial gain. Cryptocurrency is familiar to many by the first trade name used by Bitcoin. It's defined as any virtual representation of value that can be used in the form of currency. It's supposed to be encrypted to secure the operations, but there are problems with that as well. And it's important to note that there's only incipient regulation available for governing cryptocurrency trades. Now, cryptocurrency takes the evolution of currency one step further. When we graduated from the barter system, we began to use commodity-based trading currency, such as gold. But then because larger and larger amounts of gold were very difficult to transport and convey, we all agreed to use fiat currency in the form of paper bills to convey value. Now, the physical bills themselves have no intrinsic value. It only has value because the world has agreed to give it a representative value for tradable goods and services. Cryptocurrency goes one step further than that, in that there's not even any tangible item that is traded. It's all just strings of ones and zeros on computers that keep track of the trades. Now, Gideon Mark is a professor at Notre Dame Law, and he did a review of how these potential issues with these practices could cause the next global financial disaster, and prescribed a list of recommendations to prevent it, but it remains to be seen if anyone will heed those warnings. That brings us to a quick look at the national debt. Now, one could argue that the national debt is not different to cryptocurrency, except that it's negotiated in US dollars, for which a value is set and regulations exist to control it. The way it works is the US Treasury issues IOUs in the form of bills, bonds, and other securities. The Federal Reserve Bank, among others, including foreign central banks, agrees to purchase those securities and gives money to the Treasury to spend. It's effectively taking money from one federal pocket and putting it into the other. But then when it's time to pay off the debt, the U.S. Treasury literally just prints money and gives it to the Fed to cancel the debt. How fundamentally different is this practice from, say, Enron's fabricated earnings? The obvious difference is that the Fed and the Treasury are working for the greater good of smooth financial operations, which benefit the entire country, though some might find this point debatable. So what might be the next global financial crisis? Well, in 2018, one JP Morgan trader predicted that passive investment and algorithmic trading, commonly known as machine trading, would be the root of the next crisis. In 2019, a prominent member of the British Central Bank said the world was sleepwalking into the next crisis by failing to address known weaknesses in the global financial system. And many continue to reflect on the fact that very few corporate leaders have ever been held accountable for their roles in these scandals. But these predictions were all made prior to the COVID-19 global pandemic. And while infectious disease experts have suggested for years that there is the potential for a novel infectious agent to cause a global pandemic, the world certainly didn't conceive of nor prepare for what has occurred in 2020 and the economic impact that it has had. So it might be best to prepare for the unknowable future by starting to ensure a widespread return to the approaches and practices of authentic leadership and servant leadership. The development of authentic leadership theory, with its basic principles noted earlier, has largely taken off in the aftermath of these scandals in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. But servant leadership is a practice that has been advocated since the time of Christ. Some of the notable tenets of that practice are putting others first and helping the followers to grow and succeed, behaving ethically, empowering others, and creating community. These should be the fundamental starting points for anyone considering not only a leadership position, but also anyone wishing to maintain a contributing membership to society, to community. God intended for us to live in community, and perpetual stewardship of the community and well-being of its members must remain a primary concern to all. By definition, there is a difference between the role of leader and follower, but that difference should not constitute a detrimental inequity. Now, these two styles can form the basis of other leadership styles that can be used as needed to facilitate collaborative practices and egalitarian empowerment. From this foundation, the concepts of civility, democracy, and truth should develop. And in this way, ethical decision-making should become the standard. With this set of skills, the leaders that be have the best chance of foreseeing, preparing for, and leading through whatever the next financial crisis might be. And with that, I thank you for the